Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio controlled Armortek British Sherman V Firefly. Since the last video update, a lot of progress has been made to the rear upper deck portion of the model, and we'll be going over these additions and upgrades in this video. Starting with the side hull of the model, since the last video update, all and the remaining of the side hull details have been added, thus completing the side hull. The side hull details would include the side skirt mounts, the welds, as well as the addition of the Houseboat mounting system. Starting with the side skirt mount of the model, the Shermans were very distinctive in having a side skirt mounting system located on the side of the tank. Now, these systems here came a little bit later on, and if we notice, are not found on the A4 build that I built previously. One of the upgrades that was made to the Shermans since they were first built was that of this side skirt mounting system. The system itself was comprised out of several strips of metal that were perforated, and they were then welded to the side of the hull. Now keep in mind, being an M4A4 with a stretched out hull, these tanks here utilize a different, slightly longer set of side skirts compared to the ones found on the other Sherman variants. As for the side skirt rail on the model, it is fabricated out of strips of brass strip. The strips were pre-drilled out with the appropriate number of holes necessary for the component. On the front portion and on the very tip of the rear portion, the strip bends downward. On the rear, it's only this section here, while on the front of the model, the bend is a lot more gradual and runs the entire length of the strip section itself. The strip is mounted to the model with that of hidden fasteners, which are located on the strip itself and are soldered in place. The piece is then mounted to the tank via holes which are drilled into the model's side of the hull. The weld beads that you see here are purely for detail, however, do give a little bit of structure support compared to having them absent. If we notice, the welds on these components here are in sections, and they are not continuous through the entire length of the vehicle. They're only in several independent spot weld locations. Here we can see a close-up of the front portion of the fender mount, and you can see how it is a gradual slope compared to the abrupt slope which is found on the rear portion of the vehicle. The sections that you see here are a mirror image on the opposite side, and as for the amount of strips used, there are three. One in the rear, another shorter one in the front, and another long version throughout the rest of the center span. This is basically the same on the rest of the Sherman tank family. One interesting feature found on many of the Commonwealth M4A4 Sherman tanks, and Fireflies included, specifically ones with the side rails mounted, is that on the last strip of the side rail, in this location over here, there is a small notch which is cut into the side rail. As for the purpose of this notch, that I am unaware of, and if anybody does know the purpose of this cutout notch here, feel free to write it down in the comment section listed below. As for the model, the notch was added and is present on both sides of the model. Moving our way to the rear armor plate detailing. As you can see, the rear plate also has had a lot more details compared to its earlier versions found in the videos. Starting with the fender mounts, just like with the addition of the side skirt rail, the rear mudflap mounts were also added. When the Shermans were first developed, they had, rather than having this type of system here, they had two small little mud flaps which emerged from the lower hull and came out over the track. This pattern of mud flaps are actually found on my A4 build. However, one side effect with these short stubby mud flaps is that they were very prone to damage and breakage. Also, they were not compatible with the side skirt and dust shields system, which were developed for the Shermans, which came a little later on. That system was ditched, and it's not uncommon to see vehicles either have no mounting equipment in the back whatsoever, or with the addition of the side skirt mounts, this design that we have here. This design that we have here is your more standard, typical design found on the rear of Sherman tanks. It consists of a bent, angled strip that has 3 mounting holes, and it is welded to the vehicle. These portions here are fabricated out of sheet steel, and they are a mirror image from each other. Also, if you notice, there's a small little gap in between the side of the armor plate and the fender mount itself. Now, on other versions of the Sherman tank, namely that of the M4A3, there is an exhaust stack that comes and emerges from this portion over here for the Little Joe auxiliary generator. On the M4A4, that's not present. However, because these mud flaps were interchangeable with all the Sherman variants, they needed to be the same spec and size as the other versions that have the shorter width for the accommodation for the Little Joe exhaust. As for the pieces here, they are actually bolted to the model, and the fastener and fastener mounts are concealed underneath that of the weld beads. And here is a look of the mud flap mounts and fender mounts on the reverse side of the vehicle. Moving from the mud flap mounts takes us to the rest of the rear plate detailing. Now, this is actually one area of the model and its detailing which is actually very, very interesting. When the vehicles were first developed, basically none of the components that you see here were originally mounted and developed. And what you see here is actually a mix of both American upgrade as well as British modifications. The American upgrades would lead to the addition of these 2 small little fittings here, as well as other 2 small fittings which are mounted on the sides here of the bin. As for what they are actually for a design of a specific type of a flip grill, which is located, or which would have originally been located in this section here of the rear of the hull. One distinctive trait that the Sherman family does have is due to the way the engine and engine cooling system are designed. On all of the Sherman tanks, you have the engine, the exhaust, and with the air circulation system, all of the exhaust and circulation air are expelled out of the vehicle via this portion here underneath the rear hull. Because of all this air coming out and the shape of the rear hull, the air is directed downward to the floor. Now, one distinctive trait when a Sherman has when it's driving is that due to all this volume of air coming out, it kicks up a lot of the dirt and dust that is behind the vehicle on the ground, thus making a large plume of dust while the tank is in operation. This plume of dust can be considered as a negative, as it can give away the vehicle's position. This noticeable feature was noticed early on, and there were several designs in order to thwart and to minimize the amount of dust kickup as possible. Now, if we go back to an earlier video that was made on this vehicle, or even the M4A4 video, you will notice that on the original M4A4, and this is also true for the M4 and M4A1, that the only thing that is behind this plate here is a small little mesh in which the exhaust emerged from. This design here is what led to all the volume of air to be jettisoned, and which would kick up the dust. One of the changes which were made specifically to the A4 was the addition of a deflector grill, which is located in this portion here of the hull. This is described in more detail in the previous video. What the deflector grill does is it diffuses much of the air from the exhaust and the air circulation system in order to reduce the amount of volume which gets kicked up by the volume. Shortly after this design, another design was also developed, and this design kind of borrows traits from the M4A3. Keep in mind, at this time, but all of the Shermans, the Sherman, M4A1, A2, A3, and A4 were kind of being developed at around the same time, so when there would be a breakthrough in one design, the design would trickle into the rest of the series. For the M4A4, there was a designed to make a hinged deflector grill, which would have been filling up this location here of the underhull. What this grill does is that when the air comes out, it gets directed from going straight down and directs into a 90-degree angle so that it goes straight out of the back instead of straight towards the ground, which will kick up the dust. This design worked very well, and almost all of the Shermans, which were sent off to the Lend-Lease countries, as well as even more specifically to Burma, had this upgrade added. It was, again, a very large duct that would be mounted to the hull, and then the design was that whenever someone needs to get access to the engine compartment from the rear door, the mechanism would hinge upward and lock to two bosses which are mounted here on the rear deck. And that is what the purpose of these two mounts are. We have one mount here and another mount mounted on this side of the rear hull. These mounts here would have originally been the hinge work for the flip grill to mount to and pivot along. Now, when the British received their Shermans, when the Brits went ahead and started modifying them to make the vehicles better fit their needs, namely adding all this equipment back here, obviously the flip grill was no longer going to be necessary, so the Brits went ahead and amputated the flip grill from the vehicles. However, the mounts, as you can see, still remained. Even though the Brits went ahead and removed the flip grill, they went ahead and kept the hinge components and locking mounts in place, and they were not amputated. In fact, the Brits went ahead and did one step further. Rather than cutting off these components, they actually went ahead and recycled the two top lock points for the grill for use to hold up this large toolbox that we have here mounted on the rear. The large storage toolbox that we have here is a distinctive trait found on most of the Firefly converted Shermans. The way the component gets mounted to the hull is, again, recycling that of the bosses to hold up the flip grill. In addition to the two on either end, there's also two more straps which hard mounted directly to the hull itself. Now, these two strips that come out of the hull here were added by the Brits and were not there to hold up the flip grill. Now, the toolbox that you see here is a new recent addition to the EastCoastArmory.com product line. It is all made out of sheet metal that is all soldered together and is also fully functional. The set replaces the stock Armortek kit component, which is this unit that I have here in my hand. The Armortek version is comprised out of two pieces of CNC'd aluminum. It's just a hollow metal box that has its lid permanently attached once installed. The piece also gets hard mounted directly to the rear plate with that of two fasteners that we have here on either end. Rather than using the kit one, I developed my own that is functional and is more prototypical to that of the real unit. The ECA set includes the box as well as the mounting hardware that we have here. There are two bosses which have their pre-welded detailing, and what's not shown on this vehicle here are the two support strips which also hard mounted directly to the hull. Now, the two on the top are the same bosses which were originally designed by the United States in order to lock the flip grill in place. What the Brits did was, to give it extra support, they went ahead and added two more braces on either side of the bin. This style here was scratch built for the model and differs from the one that actually comes with the ECA set. The one that comes with the ECA set is replicating that of an angle iron version, which also has its welded sculpt beads mounted on. The reason why I went and fabricated a new one out of brass is because this vehicle is radio controlled. It needed the extra support compared to the resin molded version, which is more suited for static use and display. Also, as a quick note, you can see that this one here is just a simple strip and is not the angle iron version like I just mentioned. As from what I've seen on several surviving examples of Fireflies, there were two styles developed, the angle and the flat strip. Either is appropriate for a Firefly build. As for mounting and removing the box, this is done via 4 points, and that consists of 2 on each side. Not shown in this scene here is there is going to be a small brass hex head fastener, which mounts and bolts on the bin to the strip. Like I said, there's one each side, and this will be added further down the road as the vehicle gets painted. As for the two on top, these are just two simple lugs, which right now are just simple panel board nails, which will be replaced again as the build progresses. On the real tank, they're also chain retained, and the chains will be mounted in this location here. However, to take the piece off, you simply lift the lug, and the entire unit slides off of the assembly. And here we can get a good look of the rear plate with the box removed, thus seeing the bosses in full effect. As for the way the bosses mount on, as you can see there's on the box, there's two metal rectangular clips with a hole drilled in, and the hole simply indexes over the mounting stud, and the pin just goes in and holds it in place. To thoroughly keep the piece from jittering and wobbling around while the tank is in motion, that is the purpose of the second fastener, which is located on the side. Moving from the box takes us to the top deck. As you can see, since the last video, the last of the welds have been added and mounted to the model. Each one of the weld beads have been sculpted and are found in the appropriate locations where they would be found on the real vehicle. Moving from the welds takes us to the actual side rear hull detailing. Just like with pretty much all the Shermans, the Firefly is no different in having all of its tool posts exposed and mounted on these locations here. The detailing that you see here is basically the same type of detailing that you've seen on my other 1/6 scale Sherman builds that I have on the video listing that I've been building for a few years. We have here the taillight, the taillight brush guard. These two components here are listed on the EastCoastArmory.com product line, and the taillight is functional and is patched into the circuitry that was shown in a previous video for the headlights. I'll turn them on in a later scene. Moving from the headlights takes us to the rest of the tool post. Really quick, here we have the grouger slash vent. Now on Sherman tanks, this location here is actually right aft of the fuel tanks. Fuel tanks would be located under this portion of the armor. In this location here is actually where the actual track grousers would be stowed inside the vehicle when not in use. So that was the original intent. It was soon discovered that rather than having the cover cap be a flat plate which seals off the hull, they went ahead and altered the design to the one that you see here, which is that of a vent. What the vent does is it helps the wet track grousers aerate and prevents moisture from building up concealed inside the vehicle, which can cause rust and other corrosion. Also what it does is that it aids in the ventilation of the fuel tanks as well as the rest of the engine compartment when the tank is being used. With these two large vents on either side, there is some meshwork preventing any type of foreign material, either man-made or natural, getting caught inside of the vehicle. These pieces here are also found on the EastCoastArmory.com product line, along with the two rear lift hooks that I have here. It's a mirror image on the opposite side, along with the taillight. The rest of the tank's tool posts are standard for that of typical Sherman layout. We have here, which will be an axe, the pickaxe head, shovel, pickaxe handle, as well as in this location will be a large pry bar. All these components here are scratch built out of metal and bent and soldered to shape. They're then mounted to the vehicle, and sculpted weld beads have been added to all the appropriate locations. We also, in addition to the tool post, we have the tool post tie downs. This is another feature that I always add on my builds and really does help the look and really pushes it to the next level. They are simply made out of bent pieces of wire which are drilled into the hull, and the little feet that are found on all of the footman loops are just sculpted out of the same epoxy that I sculpt the welds out of. After the vehicle's built, painted, and the tools are added, small little miniature belts will be added to these locations here, and that's actually what holds the tools in place and prevents them from falling around. Now, one piece of equipment that is not standard on my other builds, but is found on this vehicle, is this component over here. This being a British Sherman, another one of the mod that the Brits did was they went ahead and added their own external fire extinguisher to the rear portion of the tank. The British fire extinguisher were mounted on this and the opposite side. The set that you see here is from Armortek, and is all comprised out of white metal, and this is just the mounting bracket. Also supplied with the set is the actual fire extinguisher itself, which will be shown later as the build progresses. The Armortek piece is very nicely done and is highly recommended, specifically if anyone is building a British or Commonwealth represented Sherman tank. As for mounting onto the hull, it is simply mounted to the model, but rather than mounting it directly flush with the hull, from what I've seen on several real examples of British Shermans, it's actually elevated on a plate. For the plate, I utilized a strip of plastic strip that was cut to shape, glued to the hull, and then had its sculpted well beads added as well. This gives the piece a nice standoff from the base plate, which better represents that of the real vehicle. Moving from the tool post takes us to the left-hand side of the top deck. As you can see, the left-hand side has considerably less components compared to the opposite side. This is as per the real vehicle and is again found on all the other Sherman builds that I've done. The details that are found on this side, however, include that of the tow cable mounting equipment. We have here a tow cable cleat. There's another cleat here found on the front near the air blower. On the real Sherman tank, the tow cable would have been mounted and secured to the front tow eye found on the blower part of the transmission cover. It would snake up, lock into this cleat here, run along the top deck, snake into this cleat here, to which then it will be anchored by the tow cable mount. Tow cable mount is another ECA accessory and is fully functional. Currently, the only thing missing on this unit here is that of a small little rest and wing nut, which will be added as the build progresses. Moving from the tow cable clamp takes us to the remainder of the rear details, which are mirror images from the opposite side, namely that of the rear lift hook, track grouser air intake, as well as the taillight and taillight brush guard. Now, being a British Commonwealth vehicle, it does feature a secondary fire extinguisher mount, just like the one on the opposite side. And again, this is included with the Armortek set, as he supplies you enough parts for 2 fire extinguishers, which is appropriate for a British Sherman. Now, because this vehicle is built as a Firefly, it has another distinctive feature that makes it a Firefly compared to the other British Commonwealth or even the American variants of the M4A4. And that has to do with this component and these footman loops that we have here. Because the Firefly was rearmed with the longer 17-pounder anti-tank gun, the traditional gun cleaning staves and rods that are for the 75mm gun were not going to be long enough in order to swab the gun barrel. So longer and a number of rods need to have been developed. Because of this, the Brits needed to go ahead and design a mounting system to mount onto the tank the extra equipment. And that is the system that we have here. It's a very simple system designed by the Brits. It comprises nothing more than a metal cup, which is welded to the vehicle, as well as another set of footman loops. The rods will be lined up in this section here, and then tie-down belts will simply tie them down and secure them in place. This feature, as one can imagine, is only found on Fireflies due to the longer gun. Moving towards the bullet splash rim, the last of the components have also been added. In the previous video, the 2 rear sections were not present. Here they have been altered, modded, and mounted to the vehicle permanently. They are mounted to the model via hidden fasteners, which are concealed under the bodywork and are permanent installation and not designed to be removed. Just like with the front sections, they have added cast texturing along with their appropriate weld. In addition to the bullet splash rim for the turret, the bullet splash rims for the fuel caps have also been fitted. These were the kit original units, and the kit original units, just like the turret splash rims, are comprised out of CNC'd aluminum. Now, the components do require a little bit of hand fitting in order to get and finesse them into the proper locations that you see here. In addition to mounting them and getting them in place, they also feature the cast texturing, which is present on the real components. This is a complete mirror image on the opposite side. Just like with all of my Sherman builds and all the scales that I work in, I always go ahead and add the drainage holes, which are found and are distinctive trait found on Shermans in this location here of the hull. The drainage holes are exactly what the name implies. Due to the shape and geometry of these portions of the hull, excess rainwater can pool up in these 2 locations, which can seep in and cause problems with the fuel or the interior of the vehicle. So the engineers quickly developed a drainage system. They comprise of nothing but a simple hole drilled into the side of the component that allows the extra water to just gutter out. Now, throughout the Sherman's developmental run, there have been several variants of these drainage holes that were employed. Anything from 1 hole to 2 holes to very large gaping, almost half-moon holes, all have been present, and for which one's best for your build, you could easily find out by simply doing some research and looking at photographs of this location here. Now, moving on from the drainage hole takes us to this portion here, which is very unique for M4A4s exclusively. Like I mentioned before, there are drain holes in this location here. Now, somewhere along the line at Chrysler, one of the engineers and designers were fearing that because of the drain holes which were at this location here, this was a weak point in the armor, and somehow a bullet or a shell or some kind of fragmentation can enter past the guard and into the turret. So in its place, they welded 2 steel plates on opposite sides of one another. It's just a simple standoff armor plate which has been welded in these 2 locations here that protect the drainage hole from any sort of stray bullet or any type of shrapnel which can possibly pass through the drainage hole and into the turret. The M4A4 was the only vehicle that I know of that received these plates, and these plates were on some of the production batches of the vehicles. Not all of them had it, but most of the ones that went to the Lend-Lease sort of did. As for the plates, they are scratch built out of 2 square pieces of Lexan, which were painted and added to the model with their weld beads represented. Moving from the bolt splash guards takes us to the interior portions, or the detailing on the interior portion of the splash guards. First, on the right-hand side, we have here the rear blower. The blower that you see here is the EastCoastArmory.com resin version, and the kit one was simply swapped out for the ECA one. Moving to the opposite side takes us to first the fire extinguisher. The fire extinguisher box you see here is another component from EastCoastArmory.com and simply gets mounted in this portion here. Of course, after the vehicle is fully painted and weathered, the handles will be painted in red. This fire extinguisher is found on all Sherman tank variants and was one that was designed and assembled in the United States. Moving our way to the filler caps. The filler caps that you see here are kit supplied with the Armortek kit and are from Armor Packs. Just like the other white metal parts, they are comprised out of casted white metal and are extremely detailed, and these components here were also used on the M4A4 build. The set contains enough fuel caps for 4 fillers. Now, for this being an M4A4, only 3 of these fillers are actually used, as the 4th one is found under the radiator cover, which I'll be going over in a little bit. As for the pieces, they again are highly recommended and are designed to be fully functional. They contain the cap, along with 2 molded and pre-welded cap mounts. As you can see on top of the cap mounts, there's a small little loop. That would be for the retention chain that holds the lock pin in place. The set also supplies you with the lock pin and pivot pin. Rather than using the white metal pivot pins, which can be a little frail, I replaced those with a simple panel board nail, which is a lot stronger and gives for a lot better performance. Like I said, the pieces are fully functional and do have some interior detailing to them, namely that of cast texturing as well as the drainage slot. Now on the kit, I went ahead and modified the way the setup is. The kit does have these holes pre-drilled and laser cut into the top deck in their appropriate locations. They are basically in the appropriate locations. However, one critique about the kit is that the holes are slightly too small. They were enlarged with a drill bit, and then a piece of plastic was mounted underneath. After the vehicle gets painted, the actual detail of the filler cap for the actual fuel tank will be added in its place. These are typically I fabricate out of aluminum and some metal wire, and are found on all of my other builds. Now on the Sherman, the filler caps are as follows. On these 2 locations here, this is gasoline, and this is the actual main 2 fuel tanks for the vehicle. For this location here, this is a premix only fuel tank, and this is only for use for the Little Joe auxiliary generator, which is located underneath this section here of the hull. To prevent the crew from accidentally mixing up the fluids, Sherman's always had a identification system identifying what the actual filler cap is to be used for. These ID tags that you see here are also East Coast Armory off-the-shelf units. As you see, this one here is for gasoline, and the premix is gas oil and has the amount of liters utilized to fill the filler cap. Now, like I said before, there is a fourth filler cap, which is used for the radiator fluid, which will be located under this location here. The M4A4, one of the most distinctive traits on the rear deck is that of the radiator cover. Because of the Chrysler multi-bank engine being so large, it also needed a very large radiator to keep the engine cool. The radiator, just like the engine itself, was so large that it didn't actually fit inside of the vehicle. Because of that, the designers had to design two blisters for just encasing the radiator into the tank's hull. One of them is found on the bottom of the vehicle, which is showcased in one of the earlier model showcase videos, and the second is located right here. Now, this component here was originally kit supplied. However, in its place, I replaced it with the resin version from eastcoastarmory.com. The East Coast Armory version has its cast texturing, cast numbering, as well as its functional detail. Now, once the component is fully painted and weathered, the actual filler cap for the radiator fluid will be added at that time. Just like with all the other retention caps, there are going to be a pin and retention chain which will be located on each one of these components. Again, this will all be added after the model is nearly completed. Moving back to the taillights, like I said before, they are the versions found on the eastcoastarmory.com product line, and the way you see it here, they are fully wired and ready and fully functional. Now, one bit of detailing that will be added to the taillight, which is not shown here, will be the clear resin lens, which will cap off the cup here and give it the remainder of its detailing. These will be added, of course, after the vehicle is fully painted. As for the lighting itself, rather than using a bulb, just like with the other builds that you've seen on my channel, I went ahead and utilized a modified LED for the use of the light. The LED, one advantage about them, besides being very small and very power saving, they are also very modifiable. The LED was put on the lathe and trimmed down in dimensions in order to have it fully fit and seat inside of the small space of the taillight. I will turn the vehicle on now and test the system. And here you can see the taillight on in the opposite side. Like I said before, the taillights are patched into the headlight function, and all lights activate in unison. Now, moving on to the last and probably the most interesting and one of the coolest details found exclusively on Fireflies is that of what's called the Houseboat system. The Houseboat system, I believe, was a bunch of brackets which would mount on a concealing camouflage type assembly in order to hide the tank. The system comprised out of several of these little units which are found throughout the side of the vehicle. Now, currently I'm still developing the remainder bits in order to finish the component, so this is really a sneak peek. Once these pieces are finalized, they will be added to the eastcoastarmory.com product line. Starting with the front of the vehicle, on the actual mud flaps themselves are these two girder mechanisms here. The girder mechanisms is what's used to stand off the actual clip mechanism from the fender. Now, to be added are going to be two arms which will come outward on either side, which hold another clip mechanism. Again, more information on that will follow. As for the girders themselves, they are bolted directly to the fender with that of real fasteners for both strength as well as detail. The rest of the weld detailing you see there is sculpted in, and the ones found on the bracket here are actually pre-molded into the resin piece. The ones that you see here were sculpted on with the rest of the welds that you see on the model. Here goes the clips which are found on the side of the vehicle's hull. As you can see, there are 3 found in the following locations. And also, as of note, the one in the back is more elevated compared to the 2 on the sides. This is again as per the real vehicle. As for the mechanism itself, it is a clip type assembly, and the actual attachment that fits in here simply slides in and is fastened in place via the 2 fasteners that we have here. You can also see that for the side detailing, the sculpted weld beads are molded into the resin component. Again, this is a mirror image on the opposite side, and more information as well as the other remaining bits to complete the houseboat system will be added in an upcoming video. In addition to the houseboat, there are a few other components that still need to be added to the rear deck, namely that of a grill, as well as the Firefly's travel lock. These components will be tooled up and added shortly after filming of this video. Also, as you can see from this video, the tank is getting very close to its 3/4 way mark. And shortly also after filming this video, I'll be starting on the detailing and functions for the tank's turret. More information on all of these components are to come in another upcoming video. And with that, that concludes this project update video for this 1/6 scale, radio-controlled Armortek British 5 Firefly. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thank you.